So today's lecture is going to be on the 5 forms of audio stealth. So let's get an overview. The 5 forms of audio stealth describes 5 levels of sound one can make and how to apply those levels effectively to evade detection, capture, or engagement. So the 5 levels are as follows: far below threshold, on threshold, above threshold, and of course, far above threshold. And so just to explain the term threshold, as that refers to the general sound of the environment, right? It doesn't need to be nothing ever has to be exact when you're measuring it, it just has to be close enough. So again, the threshold is the general sound of the room relative to the noise you're making. So let's talk about far below threshold. So sounds made far below threshold are imperceptible or effectively silent, but true silence doesn't actually exist, right? Everything makes some degree of noise. I know they say owls fly silently, but they do make some amount of noise, or everything. Like if you've heard of those silent rooms, where I think like the record is, it's what, 72 hours? Where people go crazy because you can hear your blood flow through your body and you can hear your heartbeat and all these things you can't hear under normal conditions, they're there. So again, nothing is truly silent, but sometimes it can be so quiet that you can't perceive it. An example of when you need to be that quiet is never. You don't ever have to be completely quiet. As I said before, it's all relative to the sound of the room, right? So if you're trying to be super sneaky, wily coyote, make absolutely no noise, right? This makes me look suspicious. I'm taking too much time to get from point A to point B, where, if I just put a little bit of effort into silent walking, I can get there quiet enough to get the job done. So you never ever have to be completely silent because the environment around you is never completely silent. So that takes us to the next and more applicable one, which is below threshold. Sounds made below threshold are perceptible by the human ear, but quieter than the environmental noise and therefore cannot effectively be heard. Okay, so an example of effective application: moderate stealth walking, like I just showed, in a room with a source of distraction, conversation, TV, or normal walking in a loud, crowded environment. If you're on a loud, crowded street and somebody's being creepy and you're trying to walk away from them, if they look that direction, you don't need to, right? You can just turn and walk normally because you're going to blend in, or you're going to be quieter than the live music or whatever else is going on around you. So you don't need to compromise your physical effectiveness and efficiency to be quieter than you need to be. Now we're going to talk about on threshold. This is the most interesting one. So sounds made on threshold are at the relative sound level of the environment. You are heard, but you're not noticed or identified. So examples of effective application. So a World War II story I've heard, I don't remember who told it to me, but he told me his grandpa was a commando of some sort in World War II, and I think he paradropped in to take out a piece of German artillery. And I think there were between 4 and 6 Nazi soldiers operating it, but he was able to pick them off one by one with his M1 Garand, without them detecting him, one-on-one. Obviously, an M1 Garand is loud, right? If you hear one go off within 50 feet of you or 20 feet of you, you're going to hear it. But because the gun that they were operating was so much louder, or just as loud, the sounds of the gunshots blended in with the operation of the cannon, right? So again, he didn't have a suppressed weapon, he wasn't being extra quiet, but because the environment was so loud, he was able to make his gunshots blend in and still effectively be silent, even though he was heard. And then of course, sneaking out of a house with multiple occupants. Again, offense is an easier way to give examples of this, but I don't really feel like doing that for the sake of the lecture. So to keep it defense, let's say you're in somebody's room and they're being really creepy or the vibe is bad, right? Again, if you go out into the hall and there's like 4 or 5 people there, do you really need to make no noise on your steps, or can you make the same amount of noise as one of their roommates, or vice versa? Right? If you're walking through the hall and they can't see you, it's going to sound the same as somebody else. They're probably not even going to go investigate. Obviously, if you're trying to sprint and all that's going to draw attention, but there's no need to go through the hall like this. You can just make a normal amount of noise, walk out of there calmly, and nobody will notice you were identified, most likely. And of course, escaping at a distance, right? I kind of talked about that with that little wily coyote kind of sneaking, right? If somebody sees you from 50 yards away and you're walking normally, they might notice you, they might not. But if you're being really weird or putting in, a ton of effort to be quiet, you're going to look suspicious. So you're going to compromise your visual stealth, in lieu for your audio stealth that you don't really need. Okay, now we're going to talk about above threshold. So sounds made above threshold stand out slightly above the environmental noise and are suspicious but not quite alarming. You are heard and you are noticed, but you're not identified as something suspicious, right? You make a noise, people hear what it is, but they're not sure what it is. An example is like, how the movies have you believe that suppressed guns, make like the little sound, where if I was to shoot you here, somebody outside that door wouldn't hear it. Well, no, an actual suppressed gun is still very loud, but it's like about 1/10 of the sound of an unsuppressed gun, right? So like if you were outside that window and you heard a gunshot go off in here, unsuppressed, there's no question as to what that was. But if it was a suppressed gunshot, it'd sound more like a loud thud. So maybe that's a gunshot, maybe one of the barrels fell over, you don't know exactly what it is. Or again, if I, like the cartoony, I throw a rock at a window, what was that noise? You know what I mean? It's enough to, people hear you, people notice it, but is it suspicious? Is it an intruder? You're not sure. You have to go and investigate before you make an assumption. Right, if you're a security guard and you call a code 3, which is an emergency, every time you hear a little noise or a cabinet shut, right, you're gonna get fired. So it's enough noise to be heard and noticed, but it's not quite enough for them to know something's wrong. So examples of effective application, pretty much just talked about it, creating a minor diversion, right, noise that causes the entity you're trying to evade to go investigate it, possibly opening a previously unavailable escape route. Right, maybe I fire that suppressed gun in here and the person waiting comes in and then I hide in the room and sneak out the back or something, right? I draw them from one place to another place. And now we're gonna get into the last one, far above threshold. It's pretty easy and predictable from here, but right, noises far above threshold are loud and overt enough to cause alarm. You are heard, noticed, and identified as a threat. Hopefully you're not visually identified, they don't see you, but they know, something's wrong, or if you're escaping from somewhere, they know you did it, or again, they know it's a threat. There's no question to what's going on, right? They hear an explosion, gunshot, right? Examples of effective application, major diversions, gunshots, explosions, alarms. The intent is to move all or many members of the patrolling force to one area to create an opportunity to escape physically undetected. Right? Maybe you're held captive in a room and you chew through your ropes and you grab a large object and break the window to get out, and then there's a car right there and you throw that object and smash the window at the car, and so now they think, okay, he broke out of the window and he went to get to the car, but then when they all go to the car, you went the other way and jumped the fence, right? So it's to cause a major diversion. Okay, so conclusions and takeaways of the lecture. Silence isn't necessary and being quiet isn't always necessary, right? The quotation marks are because there's no such thing as absolute silence, and quiet is about relativity, right? The noise I'm making right now if we're in the middle of a metal concert is quiet, right? It's all relative. So again, you never need to be completely imperceptibly quiet. It's an unnecessary amount of effort that can take away time and efficiency of movement. And of course, right, if you're in a super loud room, you can make a normal amount of noise versus if you're in a quiet room like this one, you do have to put some amount of effort into, reducing your noise. And then knowing the difference between being heard, being noticed, and being identified, right? We kind of talked about that. Just because I'm heard, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm noticed, that the sound I make stands out. If the sound I make stands out, I might be noticed, but again, I'm not quite identified. They don't quite know something's wrong until, of course, I'm identified. I make a noise so overt and so out of place that it's very obvious something is going wrong. And then be aware these principles are just as important for defense as they are for offense. So again, yes, you can use these principles to sneak around yourself, but again, right, the defensive side of it, if you hear a noise that's a little suspicious, right, maybe keep in the back of your mind, maybe somebody's trying to draw me out or move me around, or if you hear a very overt, noise that's, somebody calling for help or something like that. It's like, maybe, maybe this could be a trap. Maybe I'm leaving a vulnerability here. So, and that's the end of the lecture.